just a dozen. And it's our early position on the Three Waters review. Sarah and Andrew. Oh, yours. So I'll move recommendation just to open it up for discussion. Second, Councillor Clay. Tēnā kōrero.
Chair, thank you. I don't have a presentation, but I'll just speak briefly to the report and the attachment. So as the report states, the Minister of Local Government announced earlier this year that she is embarking on a Three Waters review, which is looking at both the regulation of water and how it is provided, so the service delivery arrangements. And it's partly in response to the Havelock North inquiry. So we've had, you'll remember, we've had a couple of workshops on this, including a discussion with the Watercare Board at the Joint Governing Body Watercare Board workshop. The purpose of this paper and the letter is to put some early positions to the government, given the significance of the potential significance of the reform. The timeline is, we understand, is the government will be making decisions on the regulation and a possible water regulator in 2019, and the service delivery will follow on and possibly might even extend into 2020. So as I said, there are two main parts to the reform, the review, the regulation and service delivery. While they're all significant, we are potentially more interested in the service delivery side, especially at this stage. So the options that the government has put forth are at an early stage, and some of those will affect Auckland if they're progressed. They are, briefly, they're all kind of tend to be driving towards fewer and larger water services providers, so to try and get the economies of scale and capability. So the letter sets out the kind of early, the sort of main points that we want to communicate to the government, and there are four sort of main points there. The first is strong support for continued public ownership for water assets. The government's made a commitment to that, so that's off the table, any changes to that. The second is around subsidies and making it clear that any increased costs for other parts of New Zealand that come from higher regulation, any subsidies that the government wants to provide should come from the central purse, not from local areas. So that's effectively kind of avoiding subsidising more rural areas by from user charges and rates from urban areas. And then the third is around, kind of encouraging the government to consider other options than it has discussed to date. So whether there could be, the council could enter into a contractual arrangements to share the benefits of our size and scale, with obviously through Watercare and Healthy Waters, rather than just hard structural changes, which is seems to be what is on the table at the moment. And lastly, communicating that the government should think carefully around whether stormwater is included in any changes to service delivery, because of the nature of stormwater and the fact that it's more tangibly linked to land use and transport decisions than the water and wastewater, which are closed networks. So Andrew is here as well, Andrew Chin, Auckland Water's Program Manager. So we're happy to answer any questions about the paper or the letter.
Okay, look, I'll invite Andrew, if you have any comments, my friend, to end up saying what you need to say now. If not, I'll open it up for questions.
I'm happy to just respond to questions,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
His Worship the Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's been summed up well by Sarah. The nature of the letter that we drafted arises out of the meeting that we had with Watercare and the key points that came out of that. There was, I think, broad councillor support for it. But we felt we needed to get that letter in now while they're still looking at options, and to exclude the possibility that will be fitted into some predetermined framework that doesn't fit Auckland as a model. Our view is that Auckland actually is showing the way that it can be done. We'll work cooperatively with other councils alongside us, but we don't have to be forced into amalgamation with them. So I think the summary was a good summary, and I think the letter encompasses the view as expressed back to me by councillors the other day.
Cool. No questions or comments?
No, it's good.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, there was an issue that I raised around water that goes to water and sewage that goes to sustainability, and the particular concern that I would suggest that in some instances it's not sustainably viable to prop up communities or locations where the cost of providing the water and the wastewater is incredibly high. And I would have real concerns around any subsidies that might exist around that. We just had a previous exercise around low carbon and so on. The carbon costs that go to water and sewage are very significant. So I don't know whether there's any prospect of picking that up, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, councillor. So is your point about avoiding subsidies? Because I think that point is made in the letter in the paper. But if these sort of other,
It's about avoiding subsidies, but also avoiding a situation where an area is subsidised when, frankly, it might be better for the people to provide their own rainwater off the roof or some other option that is more sustainable.
At least we can take that on board.
yes, we're
Yep.
happy to take that on board.
So it's been taken on board. Councillor Sayers.
Yeah, thank you. Probably just picking up on Councillor Walker's comment there. Certainly just another question, maybe another angle around it. Is it, say in the urbanised area, is it compulsory for somebody to have to hook onto our freshwater networks? Is that compulsory in terms of policy, or is that more to do with consenting, when it goes through the consenting process, that they may encourage that? If somebody doesn't want to connect on, have they got the options and policy-wise, but when it actually gets down to the nitty-gritty and going for consent, are they kind of obligated to do it, or kind of, what options do they have?
Through the chair, so we can compel people to connect to the network, provided that their property is within a minimum distance of the public supply. Then that's for drainage, and that's under the Local Government Act. I'm not 100% certain on the potable water supply, but you must provide a potable water supply. So, for example, in Beachlands, people have rainwater tanks, but are connected to the public drainage. So, our powers of compulsion under Section 511 of the Local Government Act allow us to compel people to connect for drainage. The potable water is different, I believe.
Okay.
So there's no further questions, comments to both of you. Thank you so much. I will put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. There's 3 minutes to our 11:30 deadline, but look, I think we'll get through another item. So it's item 13, unlucky for some. And Councillor Clow and Simpson could move and second that. That'll be great. And also for item 14 when we get it, because of the finance and performance issues with it. Cool.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair and councillors. Lovely to be with you this morning, and 13 is certainly lucky for me. So, first of all, I'd just like to, I've got a brief presentation, so I'm assume I just... I'd just like to highlight it in the two attachments that are at the back of the report, because I think they give a very nice map of the activity that's currently occurring under the water quality targeted rate. And the great thing from my perspective is this gives a very good regional perspective, that the water quality targeted rate is a regional program, and we've got a number of activities underway in just about all of the region. And the other thing I'd like to acknowledge is just the tremendous amount of work that's done to get this program up to speed very quickly. 10 years sounds like a long time, but it actually isn't that long a time to deal with some of these issues, which, as you know, have been around for a long, long time. And so we've really got the foot hard down on the accelerator at the moment. So there are 5 tranches that make up the program. One is around the Western Isthmus, one is around sedimentation, one is around the community and waterway improvement programs, one is around our on-site wastewater, and one is around the what we call safe networks, which is the other side of the coin of Safe Swim. And so safe networks is all about fixing the problem we find when we've got water quality issues at our beaches and in our waterways. That's just a map of the relative investment over the current financial year, and so you can see over $25.2 million pie for this year, how the money is allocated between those 5 initiatives that I've talked about previously. And the next slide just takes us onto a 10-year view of the world. That's how the money is planned to be allocated across the various activities. That's our best estimate at this time, and is almost certainly, as we get into the detailed planning and investigation and contracting, those relative splits may change a little bit, but they're probably pretty indicative of the relative investment in the different areas. An area where we have really hit the ground running hard is in the Western Isthmus. We've got 3 major programs underway at the moment. One is in St Mary's Bay and Macefield Beach, where we have just concluded the consent hearing process and we're waiting for the Commissioner's decision, which we're expecting to have in the next week or so. That is very important because we're planning to start construction on that project early next year. In fact, we're already underway with the procurement side on the contracting resource. We're also working very closely with the America's Cup Alliance around the Dawley Street project, where the outfall currently is inappropriately located right next to it's right in the heart of where the bases will be located, which is a totally unsatisfactory situation, both from an odour point of view, but also a water quality point of view. So we're planning to relocate that particular outfall, and that is requiring us to work closely with Watercare. And the third one is a major separation project that we have underway in Picton Street at the moment, and we're currently going for resource consents for that project. These works are all intended to be concluded in advance of the America's Cup, and so we're really putting a lot of urgency on these 3 particular programs because they're all going to be heavily influencing water quality in the inner Waitemata. The other 4 programs are specifically referred to in the report, so perhaps it's better if I just answer any questions that are relevant to those 4 areas. Suffice it to say that we have a number of activities underway in all 4 of those areas. We're still working through some local board workshops with a view to joining up the local board programs and the regional programs, so each area will have a set of water quality improvements that really join up those 2 activities. In the past, we've had specific local board initiatives and we've had regional initiatives, but we see a major benefit of effectively bringing those 2 programs together into a program of works which will occur within each local board area. It'll just have a variety of different funding mechanisms. And we're also intending to report regularly on this initiative, and so our next report to the committee will be in February next year.
Cool.
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Enough with Craig. Councillor Walker first and then Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, got a couple of questions, and I'm looking at page 158, where it mentions the Small Building Site Sediment Control and Behaviour Change Initiative. I bring this up because we had a report to the Regulatory Committee based on a case study down at Flatbush, which highlighted, frankly, a gross abuse on building sites and very significant sediment leaving these small building sites into the stormwater network and the harbours. Does this rate make allowance for budget going to compliance and monitoring? Because that was the particular deficiency there. We're just not spending anywhere near enough on compliance and monitoring.
It absolutely does, both compliance monitoring and also there's a strong education component attached to that. The neat thing about the targeted rate is it's a mixture of both CapEx and OpEx. And so the way that split will evolve will be a consequence of the final determination of the various program components. But unlike other initiatives that are relying on capital funding, this actually provides us with a really good source of OpEx funding. So ultimately, if the desire is to beef up our compliance area, we have the ability to provide financial support to assist that compliance upgrade.
And the other question I've got is around sensitive areas. For example, Okura Waiti, where you've got an adjacent marine reserve and what has been identified as a need for a higher standard of silt and sediment control in those areas. Do we have budgeting in this program for that?
Once again, if it's determined that that is an area that requires additional focus and additional concentration, yes, that is able to be incorporated within the budget.
And has that determination been made?
We have an exercise underway at the moment looking at exactly what's happening at a micro level inside that catchment, and that'll inform us as to what our next steps will need to be.
And the last question is just around stormwater intrusion into the sewage network. Is there a program that's capturing that?
Yes, under the Safe Networks program, there's a huge initiative underway with Watercare to look at illegal connections, to look at stormwater that's coming in through cracked pipes, and also the ability to replumb some of the existing combined networks going forward to make sure that we come up with the most cost-effective solution that achieves the best outcome.
And will we be having some reporting to us on the success of that, the progress on it?
Absolutely. I see that as being one of the key areas where we're going to achieve a lot of success is through proactive management in that space.
Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Simpson and then Matua Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Craig, look, thank you. This is great. This is a very good, and I especially like the map, and I think you're quite right. It highlights very easily the targeted rate right across the region. Look, my question is around monitoring of the spend and the reporting back, and it's around the comments that you made that in the past local boards have, done some work in this space and they put budget towards it, and then you've had the regional stuff, right? And you say you see it better, putting it all together. And I get the theory around what you're saying. You don't want to double up, and you want to add value to potentially what this targeted rate is carrying, and they can add a bit more, and all works. But we must be very clear, or if it was a question, will we be very clear? My answer is please, yes, but mate, we are. What exactly, which bit of the targeted rate is funding? Because this isn't necessarily a local board work program. This is a regional work program of which every local board will benefit from, and it's a regional targeted water quality rate work stream. All right. So what I'm really keen on seeing is a really clear report next time that says, look, this is what the targeted rate has done for in the wards. This may or may not have been added to by the local board, whatever, but this is the targeted rate, ward by ward, across the region. We must keep the accountability back on something that is brand new in a way that actually clearly defines what this targeted rate is being spent for, and that it doesn't get lost in a board-based work stream.
I absolutely concur 100%. The success of the program is going to be able to explain to the public exactly where the $452 million has been spent. The only point I was trying to make is that pre the targeted rate, we already had a number of water quality initiatives that were part of business as usual, and the local boards had some water quality work that was business as usual. All I'm suggesting is by incorporating both the local board initiatives, the existing business as usual, plus the new programs into a bigger program, we can achieve better outcomes as long as we maintain that degree of transparency around how the targeted rate money's been spent. There's just an additional benefit not to have multiple programs that are, just because a program is funded from a different mechanism, doesn't mean to say it shouldn't be run as an integrated program.
Yep.
But we'll make that very, very clear what's attributable to the targeted rate as opposed to what would have been attributable without the targeted rate.
Thank you. And my follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chair, is
Yes.
that having taken some of the rep for putting on a targeted rate, please be aware who should probably lead some of the comms around the work associated with that. It's the councillors who've voted for that, and even though they're happening in individual the areas, but I think just be very careful. It's not. It's the councillor that leads the outcome of the success. Don't give us all the bad job and none of the good stuff.
I think the neat thing about the targeted rate program, there'll be a lot of love and caring and sharing for everyone to enjoy. So.
It's like kumbaya. Dr. Brown.
Kia ora. Big fan of our Healthy Waters program, as you know. And as soon as I say it, you'll recall me, because I acknowledge the investment's been made, but what I can't see is investments being made in the targeted rate around improving the standards, particularly, say, stormwater, for example, insofar as I always say developers or whoever have a get out of jail licence, all they need is a heavy rainfall, and our stormwater's allowed to fail. Now, is there an intent somewhere under R&D, for example, that there'll be an investment made from out of targeted rates, or at least attributed from there, around improving standards?
There has to be an initiative around improving standards. One surrogate we've got is the Safe Swim program, which is indicating a whole lot of water quality issues in both our streams and our rivers and our beaches. But also, if you look at the general quality of stormwater, it has to be improved. And I'll give you a good, for example. We're currently in conversation with Auckland Transport around how the management of the cesspits, the stormwater network and the table drain network is currently run as a separate program by Auckland Transport, but contracted to Healthy Waters. We think there'd be a major regional benefit to bring that program under a Healthy Waters responsibility from both a funding perspective and a delivery perspective, because we can then take a far more risk-based approach to dealing with some of those issues. Because if we were to look at all of the water quality issues we've got in the region, the one biggest single point source of water quality issues we've got at the moment is the roading network. I'm not saying it's the only problem by any means, but it's 10% of the land area is roading. Therefore, in one relationship, we can deal with 10% of the problem. Yep. So we see that as being a significant step going forward.
One last, more for feedback, given the expertise in the House. I note the modelling of where the maps concentrated the investment, and it also highlights where there's minor investments, if you were, rather than none. But the concern I have would be all of this great work being done in these concentrated areas, and initially serves to improve the water quality as you're demonstrating. But if I could draw your attention to the issues that I'm concerned about that are coming out of the Waiho and the Piako rivers that are being agitated up through the Firth and then into the Waitemata through the Tāmaki Strait. So what investment or what watch do we have on that southeastern boundary around those influences? And those influences are very real.
Yeah, that is definitely a focus for us, as well as, I might add, the Kaipara catchment as well. So we've got significant issues around what's occurring in our, not only our urban catchments, but our rural catchments. So we have to work very closely with the various groups, like the various farming groups, etc., because the way that the management of those farms takes place, and the stocking and the areas that are not available for stocking, etc., and the way that planting and slope stability, etc., is achieved is going to have a huge bearing on some of the natural sediment load that's getting into our waterways at the moment. It's a real battle, and I'm not sure if we're ever going to win it, because one of the issues is that you put all this effort into big planting programs, then a storm comes along and takes it all out. And that's a real thing, and I don't know if anyone's got a silver bullet to how to solve that particular dilemma, but we can't but try to achieve the best possible outcome, but it is an ongoing battle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good enough, Councillor Sayes, and then His Worship the Mayor hopefully will finish this off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Greg. Two questions. I don't know if you can answer the first one directly, but if we can, it'd be helpful, point me in the right direction. It's probably just picking up on the conversations we've been having around those sediment loads, those natural sediment loads. And I understand it's controlled by a policy, I think it was called GDO5, something like that, that Council's got. So a little bit earlier we were talking about looking at Kura as a specific model and what's going on there. Any learnings from that, Craig? Do you know if that's going to be broadened into a regional, into modifying or updating that that current policy document? That's the first question.
Okay, so the purpose for a lot of this work is to look at where we may need to take the unitary plan provisions, because that effectively would be the home of the regulatory framework. And so based on the learnings and the new knowledge we have now, I think we almost certainly, from a Healthy Waters perspective, will be suggesting some changes to the unitary plan in this space. And then the whole regulatory framework will cascade down from that unitary plan change process.
Okay.
And this it obviously goes across a whole range of different areas, but one is definitely sedimentation is going to be a key focus area for the Healthy Waters side of the fence.
Right. Oh, very good, Craig. Thanks for that update. It's very interesting. And second question is, I've become, just in my local patch there, I've become aware of a desire from the community. Once the natural sediments and some erosion, and different sources, they want to dredge it out. So we've got policy about trying to stop the natural sediments getting into the system. I think we try and let Mother Nature take care of it as much as we can, but it seems that some of our systems regionally might be getting overloaded and that Mother Nature can't cope. And are we potentially looking at any change in direction, new policies or ideas about dredging out those things or other alternatives to help those systems, cope?
A lot of the areas you're referring to are natural sedimentation zones. So if we were to get into dredging campaigns, the concern is that the dredging in 3 or 5 years' time will be back to where you started from. So if you look globally, this whole issue around additional sedimentation is a huge global issue. And it's only going to get worse with climate change and with more severe storm events, etc. And so all I can say is that we have to be very careful and eyes wide open about how we work with nature, because if we try to take nature on, I can assure you nature will always win out. And so just a little bit of a word of caution around, it sounds good, the concept of dredging out an area that's currently sedimented, but if that then reverts back to how it was in a short period of time, I'd question whether that's a good use of money.
Right. So just picking on that, so Craig, could some of it be like you go in and say you do a dredging project, it's likely to come back, and therefore there's ongoing requirement. Like if you start it, you've got to keep going. You know?
Yeah, there'll be a maintenance cost associated with dredging, and at some point in the economic sort of analysis, it just doesn't make good economic sense if that maintenance cost is too high.
Thank you, Mr.
Yep,
Chair. Thanks,
No
Craig.
problems at all. His Worship the Mayor, and then I'll put the recommendation.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just two questions, Craig, please. You say you've made significant progress in terms of the network investigations for faecal contamination on the North Manukau, the Red Beach and Takapuna Beach and Glen Innes. Can you tell us what that progress is and when we'll be able to start to see some changes occurring on those beaches?
Okay, so the good news is that if you take the Manukau Harbour, we've got 4 sites where we've been able to remove the permanent no swim signage.
Okay, that's good.
So I think that's a huge step forward from where we are. We've got work underway at Takapuna Beach at the moment. We've identified some issues with the toilet block at the north end of Takapuna Beach, which has been a significant contributor to the stormwater quality problem we've been experiencing at north end of the beach. But we've also managed to work with the harbour swimming people with some new criteria around how they run those events, which is going to enable them to run a full schedule of events this year without the adverse impact of the safe swim outcomes, and that's supported by Surf Lifesaving as well. And so I think generally there's a lot of positive things. We've got a big study underway at the moment in Red Beach. The problem with some of these issues is they do require quite detailed diagnostics to get to the root cause of the problem. They're not simple fixes. They actually require some quite invasive investigations in order to, until you get down to almost a property by property assessment, it can be sometimes very, very difficult to ascertain exactly what the root cause of the problem is.
Thanks. The second question's around St Mary's Bay and Macefield Beach. I understand you're still having some ongoing discussions with the Residents Association for Herne Bay and St Mary's. Do you know when you'll get a final outcome from those discussions?
So we're expecting the consent to come forward later this month. Obviously, we're still in the middle of a process because we've also got the Local Government Act approvals which are coming through the Council in November. We really want to sit down with the local community because at the moment the conversation's been around separate systems versus combined systems.
Yeah.
But the real conversation needs to be around what is the water quality improvement that can actually be achieved and what's the most cost-effective way to achieve that water quality improvement. I think everyone's sort of boxed into a bit of a corner advocating for different technologies at the moment, but the real answer is probably a bit of both, and it's just coming to that, working through that issue with the community.
Okay, so we might see a bit of fine-tuning in that area?
Look, I am sure that ultimately the plan we come up with is one that the community will buy into because we will be able to demonstrate that we're getting the best value for money in terms of achieving some really good outcomes.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Clow.
Sorry, you just mentioned the Manukau. Can you just update us on Green Bay, Wood Bay, French Bay, Huia, not Huia, sorry, yeah, no, it is Huia, yeah. So just those, well, Langholm actually I should mention, not Huia, yeah. So there's the 4 or 5 real troublesome areas there that I'm sure Local Board Chair Greg Preston would be keen to hear. Is there anything being done there at all?
Yeah, I'm just trying to recall which is the area. I'm pretty sure that it's, we've definitely had, I know Weymouth is one of the signs that we've been able to remove, which has been, and I'm pretty sure that Green Bay is one of the areas that we've been able to achieve some significant improvements as well. We've got studies underway in a number of those other areas. So if you look at the Safe Swim map, which is the last attachment, you'll see there where the various status of the activities is underway, and there's a code which indicates whether we're in implementation, whether we're in investigation, and whether, you know, what stage we are in the process. So we've tried to be as transparent as possible with the community around the status of those various areas of.
There's no further questions, comments. I'm going to put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Kia ora, Craig.
Kia ora.
Now, as I said right from the beginning, once our representatives from the music industry and our staff get here, we will then shift our agenda around. So I'm going to move, and if His Worship seconds this, that item 15 goes in front of